This is Chef Hawks, and we are now on chapter 21, all about desserts. So let's jump right in. So what's the biggest thing that we think of, that most people think of, when we think about desserts? Well, chocolate springs to mind for most. So when we look at history, the Mayans would see that chocolate was a divine thing from the gods. At one stage, the French actually thought that it was a dangerous drug. But then throughout the ages, it's always been associated by a lot of people with love and romance and things like that. But the fact is, chocolate now is more popular than ever. And I don't think that's going to show any sign of slowing down. So where does chocolate come from? So it's picked from the cacao trees, and you actually produce it from the cocoa beans. And processors take those cocoa beans and they roast the actual individual beans. So you can see right at the top here, these are the bean pods. And then right under here, these are the actual cacao beans that are then processed. So as culinarians, we need to know the basics of chocolate, how we make it, we store it, and we temper it. We're going to go into that because we need to understand how we can then use it in various different things like cookies, candies, cakes, and other desserts. Chocolate is incredibly versatile, and so I also want to push your thought process on this a little as well, because the fact is we can use chocolate in more savory dishes, not just sweet ones. If you take a mole sauce as an example, it's a Mexican savory sauce which is used, but that's a savory dish. It's not, or a savory sauce. It's not a sweet sauce at all. So where do we get chocolate from? So as you can see on the picture over on the right here, these are cocoa nibs. So these are when we take the beans and we crack them into small pieces. So it's the basis of cocoa. And so what we actually do, we crush these nibs into a paste. This creates a chocolate liqueur. So that chocolate liqueur can then either be ground down to make a smoother texture, or it can be pressed, and we actually start to separate out the separate parts. So we have the solids and the liquids that come out from it. The liquids are the cocoa butter, and down on the bottom here, this is an example of cocoa butter. This is not white chocolate. This is cocoa butter. So at room temperature, it's a solid. But so we combine with the chocolate liqueur with the two to actually make the white chocolate or our regular eating chocolate. We actually take our white chocolate, would be the cocoa butter right here. We're adding flavorings, things like vanilla and sweeteners to it to make our white chocolate. The cocoa powder is actually the solids that are left after you've actually done this separation. When we've pressed it and separated the solids from the liquids, the cocoa powder is what's left after that. So let's take a look through a few different types of chocolate. So we have bittersweet chocolate. This is made of between 35 and 50% chocolate liqueur, 15% cocoa butter, 35 to 50% sugar, and this is interchangeable with semi-sweet chocolate. We'll talk about that in just a moment. We have some adding ingredients and maybe placed in there, things like nuts, different fillings, and also, so this is why it's important to always read the ingredients on the chocolates that you purchase. There may be some stabilizers, some emulsifiers, and other preservatives that are in there as well. These are generally purchased in either solid block form, in bars, chunks, and chips. So chocolate liqueur is the chocolate-flavored portion of the chocolate, and so this is obtained by grinding and liquefying those chocolate nibs that we were talking about just a minute ago. It's cooled into solid blocks of raw chocolate and separated between the cocoa solids and the cocoa butter. So semi-sweet chocolate, as we just mentioned, so this is made of 45% chocolate liqueur, 15% cocoa butter, 40% sugar, and this one is interchangeable again, as we mentioned, with the bittersweet chocolate. It may have other added ingredients, emulsifiers, preservatives, things like that in there as well. So this is sold generally in solid block form, bars, chunks, and chips. And so unsweetened bitter or baking chocolate. So this is where we have a very high chocolate liqueur level, so 90%. with 5% cocoa butter, 5% sugar. So this is something that's going to be very bitter. It's not going to have the sweetness of most chocolates that most people associate with if they're eating a bar of chocolate. This can have some other flavorings in there too. I've seen lots of different other things being added in, things like orange, things like peppers, things like that as well. This generally comes in solid blocks or bars. Then cocoa. So this is generally 10 to 25% of the cocoa butter has been removed. And so this is where we buy it in powder form, generally in bulk and cans. And then breakfast cocoa. So this is at least 22% cocoa butter. And this is generally also purchased in powder form in bulk and cans. And then cocoa butter. So this is that fat portion of the chocolate. This is and so this is what's been removed from the cacao and added into for making actual chocolate in the first place. This would be wrapped in plastic and maintained at room temperature. We do not refrigerate, otherwise it can actually damage it. It destabilizes it, but it should always be wrapped very tightly in plastic to protect it. So then we look at making the Dutch process cocoa, and so that is all but 22 to 24% of the cocoa butter has been removed, and then it's treated with alkali. This reduces the acidity. So the cocoa is actually fairly acidic. This reduces the acidity. This is generally served in powder format as well, in bulk and cans. And then we have instant cocoa. So this is where it's been pre-cooked and sweetened, usually about 80% sugar. So this is a very sweet product. Most of the time, this is a convenience product that's used. It's been emulsified to make it dissolve more easily. You literally just pour it into either hot milk or into hot water, stir it a few times, and it dissolves right in. It may have powdered milk added to give it a little more richness as well. This is sold in powder and bulk format cans. And then low-fat cocoa. This is where they've taken the cocoa and cocoa butter in there and reduced it down even farther. It's generally less than 10% cocoa butter format in there, and this is served again in powder format, bulk and cans. So storing chocolate. So chocolate and cocoa butter are very sensitive to odors, light, and heat. They will soak up other odors that are around them, and it can ruin them. The light and the heat can melt them and we'll talk about it in a little while, it can actually damage the crystallized format that it actually holds to maintain it. So we have to wrap it completely and thoroughly to make sure that it's not exposed to any of these issues. It should be stored in a cool, dry, well-ventilated area. Don't refrigerate it. It should last for several months. Really at least a year if it's stored correctly, or even longer. Cocoa butter and chocolate actually have a very long shelf life as long as they're very well maintained. So one issue that we can come across is that we can find bloom. If you were to see this chocolate right here, you would probably be horrified, think that it's gone bad, and throw it out. Well, there's really actually nothing wrong with it. What's happened with this is that the chocolate has actually melted, and it's done what we call bloom, which is where the cocoa butter, which actually creates crystals as it starts to solidify, has actually risen to the surface. It doesn't actually affect the actual quality of it. You can actually melt this back down, and you can restabilize it to be able to use it again. It just doesn't look very good. So this is where we come into tempering. So what is tempering? So if you get a bar of chocolate and you go to snap off a square of that chocolate, if it didn't snap, if it just kind of bent down like it was made of a piece of rubber, you would automatically think there's something wrong. You may have even had it before in your life where you had that bar of chocolate that was left on the windowsill, or that was left out somewhere where it got a little overheated, or it got overheated in the car on the way home from the grocery store. You get home and you're like, oh man, that stinks. I really want to eat this bar of chocolate, but I don't want it to be all melted. You put it in the fridge for a couple of hours, you take it out, hey, it's solidified. But then when you go to snap it, snap off a chunk, even if there's visible chunks left on it, then it kind of bends. It no longer snaps. So this is what really comes in. We should have fantastic chocolate that's good and hard and has a good snap to it, has a nice shine to it, and it shouldn't be kind of sticky. It shouldn't melt in your hands too easily. And this is where tempering comes in. So how do we temper chocolate? There are actually a number of different ways so that we can actually achieve this. Let's take a look at a video, and we can actually address a few different ways that we can make this happen. Alright, so this great pastry chef here actually goes through 3 separate ways that we can temper chocolate. They all achieve the same thing in the end, but it gives us 3 different options to work with. So it's quite a long video here, but it'll give us some good information that you'll be able to hold on to.
Hey Sugar Geeks, Liz here again. Today we're going to learn how to temper chocolate. What's that mean? We're going to learn all about it coming up next on the Sugar Geek Show. So what is chocolate? Chocolate actually consists of 2 important things, cocoa solids and cocoa butter. Cocoa butter is the part of the chocolate that turns liquid when you heat it. And when chocolate is tempered, it has a crystalline structure that aligns perfectly and makes chocolate have that shine, release the molds, it has that snap when you bite into it. And when you melt chocolate, that crystalline structure gets demolished. And as chocolate cools, that crystalline structure is going to start developing again, but we want to control how those crystals come together. So let's imagine that this is chocolate. It's all tempered and everything is aligned. This is the cocoa solids, and this is the cocoa butter. This is what we want our chocolate to be. But when you melt chocolate, we're separating the cocoa butter from the cocoa solids. So as the chocolate's cooling, the cocoa butter and the cocoa solids are going to want to come together and recreate a crystalline form any way that they can. But we want to control that and only let it form the crystals that we want it to form. At 100 degrees, at 90 degrees, at 95 degrees, all of these different temperatures, these crystalline structures are going to start forming. And we want to control that. And the way we control it is through agitation. So as those crystals start forming at 100 degrees, nope, not the right crystals. Let's stir, 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 stop those crystals from forming. And then when it gets to 95 degrees, that is where the right crystals are going to start forming. The tempered chocolate crystals, the magic crystals. So it's really important that you agitate your chocolate up until the point that it starts developing these crystals. And then we want to cool the chocolate all the way down to 79 degrees to give time for those crystals to fully develop and to grow. The stronger these crystals are, the better your chocolate is going to be tempered. Now, how do we get those crystals to form properly? I'm going to show you 3 different ways that you can temper your chocolate. Important thing to note, when we're talking about this form of tempering chocolate, we're talking about semi-sweet or dark chocolate. If you're working with milk chocolate or white chocolate, then you're going to work at very slightly different temperatures. Those are listed on the blog post. So what type of chocolate is best for tempering? Well, basically you're going to need something that is real chocolate. What do I mean by real chocolate? I mean it has to have cocoa butter in it. There's basically 2 types of chocolate, compound chocolate and real chocolate. Compound chocolate is going to have other things in it besides cocoa butter, like vegetable oil, hydrogenated palm kernel oil, basically things that aren't cocoa butter. And the reason that compound chocolate exists is because you can just melt it and it will harden up all on its own. But it's not going to release from a chocolate mold like real chocolate is going to release. So you can use it for cake pops, you can use it to make water ganache, you can even use it to make ganache to frost a cake, but it's not going to be good for using in candy molds. The other thing is real chocolate melts basically at body temperature. So when you put a piece of beautifully tempered, delicious chocolate in your mouth is watering. It's going to melt on your tongue and just like have that really great mouth feel. Compound chocolate melts at about 100 degrees, so you actually have to chew it to consume it. So it doesn't have exactly the same sort of mouth feel, but does anybody else notice that? Maybe, probably not. So you might think that you can tell if chocolate is real chocolate or fake chocolate, like if it comes in a candy bar, oh, it must be real. Not necessarily. Always check the ingredients. If it has cocoa butter in it, it's real chocolate. Huzzah! All right, right, so for tempering our chocolate, we need some very simple tools. The most important one being our spatula. This spatula has a thermometer built into it, so it's going to help us keep an eye on how hard our chocolate is at all times. Secondly, we're going to be using a silicone bowl, or a plastic bowl is fine, just so that it doesn't trap any heat in the bowl, and we keep all of the temperature controlling in the chocolate. If you're using any method besides the microwave version of tempering chocolate, you're going to need a double boiler. And then lastly, you're just going to want a knife to chop up your chocolate into small pieces, or you can use a grater if you're using a bar. So the first way is called the seeding method. This is the most common way of tempering chocolate and is the most difficult in my opinion because it takes so long. Basically, you take a large amount of chocolate and you melt it down, usually over a double boiler, until it reaches about 115 degrees, no more than 120. You don't want to burn it. And then we want to start cooling that chocolate down. The way that we cool it is by adding in more chocolate that hasn't been melted. This first part of the chocolate is just to help cool it down. We're stirring, saying crystals don't develop yet. We're just cooling. This can take a little while, which is why it's not my favorite method. But once you get to 95 degrees, you want to make sure that there are a few bits of unmelted tempered chocolate in that bowl because those tempered crystals attach to the untempered crystals and make everything tempered again at 95 degrees. So it's really important to be agitating your chocolate until you get to that point. And then we're going to cool the chocolate all the way down to 79 degrees, still continuing to agitate occasionally to just make sure the temperature of the chocolate is consistent inside and outside. And then once we get down to 79 degrees, you're going to take a little of that chocolate, place it in the fridge, let it cool for 5 minutes, and then do a test. Okay, so this is our hopefully tempered chocolate. When I peel it off the parchment, it should release very cleanly, no residue. So if this is tempered, it should have a snap. Oh yes. You see how sharp that break is? That is tempered chocolate. It's shiny. That way I know it's going to release from the molds. If it's not tempered, this is chocolate that I know is not tempered. I just melted it and poured it onto the parchment here. When you peel it off, it leaves a residue. It's not clean. It's dull. It's not shiny. And then when you go to break it, it literally will not snap. It just bends. Very sad. So this is a good way of knowing if it's tempered or not. If it's not tempered, just heat this back up to 94 degrees, add in some more chopped chocolate to reseed it, and cool it to 84. If it is tempered, then you want to go ahead and heat it up to 85, 90 degrees, no more than 95 degrees. Otherwise, you are going to ruin all of those crystals that you just spent all that time growing. Method 2 is using something called beta crystals, which is something you can buy on Amazon, and I'll put the link on the blog post. But basically what this is freeze-dried tempered cocoa butter. So you can just melt down your chocolate, cool it to 95 degrees, and add in a couple of scoops of these beta crystals, and it will immediately start forming those crystalline structures. And because it's freeze-dried and like this powder, it just melts really quickly, and it's kind of like a foolproof way of tempering your chocolate. But the same process, heating to 115, cooling to 95, adding your beta crystals, cool all the way down to 79, and then heat back up to 85, 90 degrees for workability. Boom, boom, boom. The last method, the most important method, the method I literally just learned. So yeah, now you know my secret. I learned something and then I just teach it to you. Tempering in the microwave. So I've heard of this process. I didn't understand it because it just seems so easy that I'm like, there's no way that this would possibly work. And I tried it and it did. I couldn't believe it. So we already know that crystals develop at 95 degrees and they get ruined at 95 degrees. In theory, you can melt your chocolate, and as long as it never goes above 95 degrees, you do not ruin those crystals that make the tempered chocolate tempered. But how do you melt chocolate without ruining, those crystals? The microwave. So I'm going to show you how to do that. So to temper in the microwave, we're going to place 12 ounces of semi-sweet chocolate. I'm using Calibo. I'll put the link to the type of chocolate that I'm using in the blog post. And we're going to chop this chocolate up finely. This is important, especially if it's a big bar, you want to grate it. The smaller the pieces, the easier it's going to melt, and the less chances you will have of accidentally heating it too hot. We're going to put this chocolate into a plastic or a silicone bowl so that it doesn't get too hot. Usually you would melt chocolate on a double boiler, but the glass really holds on to heat, so that's going to ruin our temper. We don't want to use glass. So we're going to start with 30 seconds, and then stir, and then 30 seconds again, and stir, and then we're going to do 15 seconds, and then we're going to do 10 seconds. And the second you see that most of your chocolate is melted, don't heat it more. Just keep mixing until it's all melted. I'm using my spatula that has the thermometer in it. That's going to help me keep an eye on the chocolate to make sure it's not getting above 90 degrees. This is like my safe zone because inevitably you might accidentally go up to 92. So if you don't get past 95, you're probably going to be okay. But I say stay under 90 for your safety because if it's above 95, and that can happen very easily, then the temper is ruined. So what happens if you accidentally overheat your chocolate, which definitely will probably happen at some point? Don't worry, your chocolate's not ruined. It's just the temper is broken. So go ahead and use one of the other two methods, like the seeding method or the beta crystals, to get your chocolate back in temper. So once your chocolate is melted, it's tempered. It's already tempered. We never ruined the temper. One thing to note is that this really only works for small amounts of chocolate. If you need to temper a huge amount of chocolate, you're probably going to have to use the seeding method or the beta crystals. But for little small molds and little simple candies, this is the perfect way to temper chocolate. Once you're done making all of your fancy chocolates and stuff, you might have leftover chocolate. What I do is I take this tempered chocolate and pour it onto some plastic wrap or some parchment, spread it out thin, let it set up, and then break it up into small pieces so that I can use this tempered chocolate again. So now that your chocolate is tempered, you can go ahead and use it for candy molds to make chocolate spheres, or you can use it to just pipe out fun stars and hearts like I do for my daughter Avalon to use as treat for being a good girl.
So that was a great video because this showed us 3 different ways that we can use. Now, that last method where she talks about using the microwave to heat it up to where you never actually break the crystal tempering of that chocolate, there is actually a 4th way that I like to use as well, and that's by using our sous vide machines. So we have 4 sous vide machines in our kitchen, and they work fantastically because they have incredible control. So if you actually place our chocolate into into either a Ziploc bag or into one of the vacuum bags, as long as you never let any water enter into that chocolate, because water is the kryptonite to chocolate. It will ruin any chocolate. But as long as you have it properly sealed up, then you can put it into the hot water with the sous vide machine, maintaining it below 95 degrees, so it will never get overheated, and it will maintain that chocolate exactly to where you need it, so that you can control it, and then be able to use your chocolate, and that way you can actually maintain that chocolate at the temperature you need it when you're working with it for a fairly significant period of time, and it will never break the temper. Anyway, so let's just go back over tempering. So tempered chocolate it makes it possible for us to be able to coat items with a good even layer where it's fully melted, but it's going to maintain that crystallized ability. So it will harden to have that nice shiny shell and that great appearance and having that great snap to it. So how do we test to make sure that chocolate is tempered? So we can dip parchment paper or the edge of a scraper. We can let that set or spread the chocolate onto the piece of parchment paper and let that set up. It should, within about a minute or so, if it's a thin layer, it should start to set up and you get that good snap and you get that nice shiny shell to it. So you can actually use that tempered chocolate to dip items into to actually coat them. You can place items onto a rack over a tray, and you can actually drizzle the chocolate over top of them. You can pour the chocolate over the top, or you can drizzle or pipe designs out with it, as you saw in the video where they were piping out some hearts and some stars and things like that. And you can use it as a glaze as well. So now let's go on to more of our dessert items. So let's look at custards. So generally a custard uses eggs as the thickening agent to it and some other kind of liquid mixture to add with it. So the eggs actually coagulate, the protein in the eggs coagulate that gives that thickness. This is something that's incredibly delicate. If you overheat an egg, or the egg yolks or egg whites, they curdle, they split, and then it just turns out to be very lumpy, just like scrambled eggs. Which scrambled eggs are wonderful for breakfast, but scrambled eggs are not wonderful if you're trying to make a dessert. And so if you do ever find that you're cooking something through to make some custards or anything else that has eggs in it, if you do see it starting to curdle, if you catch it quickly enough, you may be able to strain it to get rid of the lumps. However, if it's gone too far, it has to be discarded. You cannot reverse the curdling process where the coagulation of the eggs have happened. So let's look at a few ways that we use custards. So we have baked custards. So as you can see up here, this is a bread and butter pudding, actually, that we have right here. Slices of bread that have been buttered up, some cinnamon on there, some raisins on there, and then you pour an egg custard into this, and then you bake this off. This is a similar kind of way of making cheesecake and flan as well, and bread pudding as well. You bake it in the oven or in a water bath. You want to control the temperature very carefully with this to make sure, again, that we're not having any curdling of those egg that's within this. Then we have stirred custards. So stirred custards are the type of ones that would be more like a sauce. This is where you're going to stir it either over a double boiler, which is where you have one pan inside the other with the bottom one having water in there, so it's never going above the boiling point of water, 212. Or 100 Celsius. Or you can have a direct flame under there, but you have to be incredibly careful with it, because otherwise, again, you're going to get coagulation happening. So this will be used for things like puddings, creme anglaise, and pastry cream as well. We're going to talk a little more about those in just a moment. And then we have frozen custards. What is a frozen custard? Well, at the end of the day, it's ice cream. And so we take egg and liquid mixtures, we cook them and then freeze them, producing our ice cream. We're going to look more into that in just a couple of minutes. So let's look at creme anglaise first. So creme anglaise literally means English cream. It's the French term for English cream. And so this is a vanilla flavored sauce, and you can see right over here, it's a perfect example of it. It's a pouring sauce. And so you can either use it on its by itself, or you can use it as a dessert sauce, or the base for French vanilla ice cream as well. It's exactly the same recipe that you would use for that. And so then we look at pastry cream, or creme pâtissière. What is pastry cream? So this is something that we make that has a greater density to it. And actually these eclairs, or these profiteroles here, this is an example of pastry cream inside here. It's more dense. It's great for filling different things like that, or to use as a base for a souffle. Bavarian cream. So Bavarian cream is where we take a vanilla sauce, a basic vanilla sauce, and we add gelatin into that, and then we actually add some whipped cream. We fold in some whipped cream to actually make it form. We can either use that by itself, as you can see up the top here. You can actually spoon this over different desserts, or you can actually use it as an actual dessert as well. How do we make creme anglaise, or a vanilla sauce? So we measure all of our ingredients, because that's what we always do. We start off with our mise en place, and then we're whisking the sugar into the egg yolks, and then in a separate pan, we're heating up the cream and vanilla just below the boil. We're not boiling this. And then what we need to do is we need to temper our eggs. We're going to look more at tempering eggs in just a couple of moments with another video. But what we're doing is we're adding some of that hot liquid, the hot cream, into the eggs, just a ladle at a time, and we're beating that in so that it allows the eggs to start to get used to the higher temperature. This will actually help them to be able to be cooked to a certain extent, to slightly thicken, but without coagulating. We have to make sure we're constantly stirring this so that that coagulation doesn't happen, and we're evenly distributing the heat that's coming through that pan. So either on a very low heat or on a double boiler to protect it, we're cooking it through until we get to a nappe consistency. And I'll show you in a moment on this video where I actually performed a nappe test, where you can actually put it onto the back of a spoon and wipe your finger through, and if it leaves that trail, then that means it's a perfect nappe consistency. If you do have any lumps in there, you would strain it off at this stage as well, and then you can actually whisk it rapidly over an ice bath to cool it down. So making pastry cream or creme pâtissier. So this is where we're dissolving sugar into the milk, we're bringing that up to a boil, and then we're whipping the eggs, and then we start to sift the starch, the cornstarch, and the sugar into the eggs. We beat that until it's smooth, so it's fully combined in there. And then we're taking about a quarter of the boiling milk, and we're putting that into the cornstarch mixture. This is to loosen it up a little so we're ready to be able to use it in a similar way to where we use a slurry to thicken a sauce. This is a similar type of a process here. We return the 75% of the milk back to the heat, bring it up to the boil, and we slowly add the tempered cornstarch and egg mixture. We bring that up to the boil again, constantly whisking it, otherwise you will get it where it can burn. And removing it from the heat, stirring in the butter and the vanilla, and then you can pour that into a hotel pan, one of the wider hotel pans, placing plastic wrap on the surface of the cream. This is very important because this sauce, the creme pâtissier, will actually form a skin on top, a kind of a leathery skin on top that you would have to scrape away, and that would be a spoiled product. So place that wrap on top of the actual cream itself, so that that doesn't form. And then you chill that in an ice bath. You have to stir that up before you then use it. So let's look at some frozen desserts. So, and in fact, what we'll do, we'll take a look at a video that I made of making just a regular ice cream. It's a vanilla ice cream. Okay, and so this was a video that I made of just making just a regular vanilla ice cream. Now, what you can do with this, and if you look, I have some other videos in my YouTube channel on Chef Hawks, where you can actually go in and you can see where I use this basic level of ice cream here to have vanilla, and then you can add all sorts of other things to it after that to whatever other flavor you would like. Let's take a look. Okay, everybody, it's warming up. We have eggs, we have vanilla, we have cream, we have half and half, we have sugar. It's time to make some ice. First things first, we have our half and half and our heavy cream. So now we've got our cream and our half and half warming up nicely. We need to get these eggs separated. So for the sake of this, for the ice cream, all we want to have is just the egg yolk. However, that doesn't mean that we're going to waste the egg whites. The egg whites are very valuable to us. There are lots of other projects that we can do with those. So we're going to carefully separate these out so that we can get all of our egg yolks in one and our egg whites in the other. So now we're going to whisk our egg yolks. We want to get some air into these egg yolks. And once we've done that, we'll slowly start to add in sugar. So now this can ribbon through nicely. So this is all ready for us to add our hot cream and half and half. So this is a critical point. This is hot milk, almost boiling milk, or cream and milk. This is made mainly from eggs. We mix these together too quickly, then we're going to have some scrambled eggs. So we take a little of this, we're going to temper these eggs. So we pour a little in, we're going to stir this in gently. What's going to happen is these eggs are going to get used to that warmer temperature. we'll add a little more, then a little more, until we can finish off all of it in. Now we have our cream fully integrated in there. We add it gently and slowly to temper those eggs. Now we can pour this wonderful, smooth, silky, creamy mixture back into our pan. We're going to bring this back up to 170 Fahrenheit, or about 77 Celsius, very gently, very carefully. We cannot overheat it at this time. If we do, we have a bucket of scrambled eggs. Wow, just look at how rich and creamy this is. Absolutely gorgeous. Now, if you're not lucky enough to have a thermometer, it's okay, don't worry. Just gently bring it up to the temperature where what we're going to have is a nappe test. If you look at this, it's now coating the back of this spoon with the ice cream product. You run your finger through. If it holds that image right there, that line right there, that means it's ready. Never overcook it, otherwise it's a guaranteed thing. You're going to have some scrambled eggs. So now, the last thing we're going to do is add in our flavoring. And so, with our flavoring, we're actually going to make vanilla. So we have some vanilla extract here. Now it's important that you don't add this in around the time when you're boiling, because if you do, then these flavoring ingredients tend to be very finicky. They can actually lose a lot of their potency. So always add those flavoring ingredients in after you've taken it off the boil, once it's starting to cool down. And now we need to get this cooled down as quickly as we can, straight through that temperature danger zone, bringing it back down below 41 degrees. We often talk in class about, well, how are we going to get this to cool down quickly? Well, ice bath, that's the quickest way that we can get this knocked out. You don't have to have any of those expensive blast chillers or anything like that. Just use a good old-fashioned ice bath. Get this chilled down at least to room temperature. Then we can get it into a container and seal it up. It can go in the refrigerator. Once this is fully chilled down, then we can go on to the whipping part. So now we have the ice cream machine is out. It's all plugged in and ready to go. Everything is clean in there. Very important. You must make sure that everything's clean. And I've got the vanilla base that we created, and we've now chilled down. And we're just going to fill this up to the mark. I'm going to lock the lid in place. We're all ready to go. Okay, this is now shut off, and wow, it's really risen. We have great looking rich ice cream here. So now it's recommended that we take this ice cream. It's still relatively soft. It's like soft serve right now. And we're going to scoop all this out. We're going to put it in the freezer for a couple of hours so it can really set up. This is going to be great. So let's review over ice cream. So we saw how we make the ice cream. So ice cream, vanilla ice cream on the market should be 10% or more milk fat. So it should be a fairly rich product. Other flavors should be at least about 8%. So quality ice creams, as we just saw where I made a really good quality ice cream there, should be made with a custard base where I used the eggs and the cream and the sugar to actually make that good, rich, thick base to start from. So it should be that it readily melts in the mouth, but it does not weep or separate as it starts to loosen up, as it starts to warm up. It should stay as a solid creaminess. It shouldn't be separating out with its water content in one area and fat content in another. So the purpose of those egg yolks in ice cream is that it adds a real buttery flavor and a creaminess, and it gives that soft texture where it helps you to be able to whip it up to have only very, very small crystals in there and gives that nice flavor, that nice mouthfeel. When you're making sorbet, we actually add a little egg white in there, and that again will help with the creamy texture because it actually makes it a little harder for it to fully freeze, and so it gives that nice soft texture on the palate. So we can serve ice cream as part of a larger dish, things like ice cream floats, ice cream sundaes, or ice cream, as you can see in the picture right here, can be served just by itself. But let's look at gelato. So gelato is the Italian version of ice cream. So gelato generally does not contain eggs. Traditionally, they don't make it with eggs. It's made with whole milk, so it's actually a lower fat product than most ice creams. And so the reason why it generally still is nice and rich and creamy is purely because it's actually served at a slightly warmer temperature, so that it's not necessarily melting, but it's softer than you would serve most ice creams. So what is sherbet? So sherbet is when we use a frozen mixture of fruit juice or fruit puree, and we actually would add either some eggs or some milk or both in there, because that adds some creaminess and richness to it. This is served as a dessert. So then sorbet, sometimes sherbets and sorbets can be mixed up between the two, but a true sorbet has no dairy in it at all. That's actually made with fruit juice or fruit puree with a sweetener of some sort, generally sugar. And then other flavors or additives are added in there, as we mentioned before, to give that creaminess and that nice mouthfeel. We'll very often use a little egg white at the end of the blending for that as well. And this is perfect to be able to use for a first course, a palate cleanser, and a dessert. So why is it so versatile? Well, generally, if you're serving it as a first course or a palate cleanser, it's generally only being served as a small one individual scoop of it, and it would be something along the lines of possibly a mint flavor, a mild mint flavor, maybe a lemon flavor or a lime flavor, something that would actually just be something quick and brief that just cleanses your palate, as opposed to it being really sugary and sweet, which is the type of one you would make if you're going to have that for dessert. So frozen yogurt is basically where you're making an ice cream, except for you're adding yogurt into there. So basically what you can do with this is you can then make a non-fat or a low-fat frozen yogurt, and it still has that creamy richness that you get with ice cream. So it gives you the best of both worlds. You can actually lower the fat content, but still have that great mouthfeel to it. But as naturally, yogurt has that tanginess, that acidity level to it as well. It gives you that wonderful flavor, so it can actually emphasize the flavors of things like raspberries. So if you have a raspberry frozen yogurt, as you can see in the picture right here, that acidity will bring out more of the flavor of that frozen yogurt. So let's look at poaching different products as in terms of our desserts. It's actually traditional to poach various different fruits that are made into desserts. And so this is done by using a moist heat cooking method, where we submerge the food into a liquid. We're only cooking it between 160 and 180. Remember, boiling is 212. So we are even below a simmer on this, to where we are barely keeping it on a heat level where it's going to very slowly cook the fruit item all the way through, so that way it doesn't go mushy on the outside. It must maintain its integrity, but to be cooked through. So this is a great example of something we've done. If you look at the picture right down here, these were some poached pears. As you can see, we fanned these out to give a nice design to them. The ones up here have been poached in red wine. And so what you actually would generally do is combine the fruit with some sort of liquid. So that could be some kind of a simple syrup with sugar and water and some spices in there. It can also include wine, like we can see in the top picture, where we've got some red wine in this one here as well. And we just heat these through until they're tender. We're just poaching, just like when we're poaching eggs. We're not boiling them, we're just gently heating them through until they're nice and tender, but not breaking apart. So some great examples of these are peach melba, when you cook some peaches off, and then pears belle Hélène. They're both very traditional dishes made with peaches and with pears. And so you want to always use firm fruit to make these. If you're starting off with something like bananas, then they're just going to break up so quickly, you just won't be able to achieve what you're looking for with this. So we're using things like apples and pears and peaches, But things like peaches, you would actually want to use a fairly firm peach, so again, it doesn't break up before you finish cooking it through. So torts, what is a tort? So this is where you have a multi-layered cake, as you can see on this image right here. We've got the first 3 slices right here. There'll be another one that will go on top of this as well, at least. So you have this very elegant, rich, multi-layered cake, and you're filling each layer in between with jam or buttercream. A genoise sponge, which is a French sponge cake, is very popular to use for this purpose. And you split those layers and you're coating the cake with a simple syrup, and then you're frosting the entire cake all the way around once you're complete. So let's look at some fruit sauces. So fruit sauces can be made with either raw fruit or cooked fruit, depending upon exactly what it is you're using and making, and if it needs to be broken down at all with a cooking process. So one extremely popular type of fruit sauce is called a coulis. C-O-U-L-I-S. We don't pronounce the S, a coulis. So this is where you make a fruit sauce. Very often it's popular to make it with berries, but you can use other fruits as well. And we're actually going to pulverize these, and we'll strain them through to get rid of any seeds or skin, because they can either be crunchy or chewy, or can be kind of leathery in some cases. Things like blueberries can have a very leathery skin to them. Raspberries have very tough seeds. So we'll actually strain those off, and we thicken it, if need be, with cornstarch, arrowroot, or a light pectin. Pectin is also used in things like jam as well. Or it can be that you might just find that there's enough fruit content in there to thicken it by itself. These are perfect to be used for topping ice creams, cheesecakes, and parfaits as well. So this is another video that I made all about making fresh berry coulis. Again, these are very, very simple products to be able to make. We're going to make a really good fresh berry coulis. And so this is a great way that you can use up some imperfect raspberries, strawberries, snozzberries. No, don't use snozzberries, they're never good. But blackberries, blueberries, anything like that that's not quite perfect, but you can make a really nice fresh berry sauce, which we call a coulis. So all we're going to use today, we've got a good handful of some strawberries and raspberries right here. We're going to take right about a 1/4 cup of sugar, pour that right in. Now we want to have a little acidity, so we're going to add a little lemon juice on top. And as you know, we've always talked about adding a little acidity to things. It's almost like seasoning. It just brings out the flavor. And then we're just going to screw the lid on nice and tight. And now we have this fantastic, gorgeous color, strawberry raspberry coulis. But we have a lot of seeds in here, and especially raspberry seeds tend to be very crunchy, and that's not what we want to have in our sauce. So what we're going to do, we're going to put it through a fine sieve. Just pour this straight in. It's got this amazing, rich color, and I can tell you this, the aroma is just fantastic. And all we're going to do, we're going to stir this through. That's just going to come through nicely through here. It's going to give us a fantastic, nice sauce, which is self-thickening, full of all the flavors and the aromas, but without the seeds. Perfect for using on desserts, and perfect for even adding into things like vinaigrettes that we can add on salads as well. Enjoy. With fruit syrups. So now we're looking at something which is a cooked sugar-based juice. So naturally this will actually thicken itself because of the sugar that's been added into that fruit juice there. So this is used for garnishing desserts and ice creams, and it complements breakfast items as well. Caramel sauces, so this is where we're cooking sugar and caramelizing it with butter, so we have the sweetness and the richness, and if we raise the heat of this, then you're going to make a darker caramel, or if it's slightly cooler, then it'll be a lighter caramel. We're always generally aiming for like an amber golden brown. If you go a little too high, you will create a bitter caramel. There are some very specific times when you will actually try to make a bitter caramel in culinary arts, but generally, if you're doing it for a sauce, that's not the preference to go for. And also, if you overcook this, then you'll actually have some of that sugar will crystallize and it will over thicken the caramel sauce. Then we have butterscotch flavored sauces. Well, this is where we're basically taking that caramel sauce recipe and we're adding vanilla and brown sugar to it that makes a really full, rich flavor with the butterscotch. But how do we make a chocolate sauce? So this is when we're doing cocoa or melted chocolate as the base. We'll be adding butter and corn syrup to give that liquidity to it, that liquid quality to it. But then we can also have a chocolate fondue. If we're making chocolate fondue, that's where that product will actually harden when it's cooled. So depending upon exactly how you want that chocolate sauce to be and the purpose of it, whether it's going to be going just directly onto a dessert, or if it's going to be in a chocolate fountain, or if it's just going to be poured over ice cream, depends on the thickness that you're looking for and exactly its ability to either harden or stay as a liquid. Alright, so a Zabayoni or a Zabayoni. Zabayon is French, Zabayoni is Italian. So this is a very fragile foam. So this is where we're using egg yolks, sugar, and masala wine, and we're actually creating a very delicate foam. Because of how delicate it is, this is not something that you can make and prep up in hours in advance. This is something you're going to be making and using almost immediately, but you're having to constantly whip it over simmering water until it's nice and thick and very light and foamy and fluffy. So I feel that we covered a lot of different things here. We went all the way from chocolate, all the way down to the sauces, to frozen desserts with ice creams and sorbets and sherbets in between. Please ask me if you have any questions about anything. But that's it for chapter 21 now. I look forward to seeing you all in chapter 22. Cheers.